In this series of videos I'm attempting to repair an ADM3 dumb terminal. This is not it. This is actually the innards from an old black and white TV that I dismantled in the previous video in this series. And the reason I've done this is because if you saw the first video you'll know that the tube in this particular ADM is destroyed. The neck's been broken off it, and because the tubes are so hard to get here I decided to try and see if I could use this particular tube. I did buy this TV to repair and restore, but it turned up too badly damaged, but the tube seems to be working, so I wanted to just do a few experiments and see if it would be possible to use this tube to repair the ADM. It won't be straightforward. This is a different type of tube, of course, and it's a much higher deflection angle, so it will need much more drive current to deflect the beam. But it seemed like an interesting project, so I decided to give this a go. So what I've done so far is strip down the TV. I've reconnected all the bits I need on the bench just to get the tube up and running. I've left quite a few bits out that I don't need, so we can get those out of the way. This is just in order to get the tube to light up and for us to be able to apply a signal to it. The first thing I need to do is figure out the connections to this donor tube, and then we can see how that compares with a standard ADM tube and see if it's going to be possible to get this to work in the ADM3, and if not, then what modifications will be needed to make that work. So the first thing I want to do is figure out which the heater connections are. One of the things we need to be careful with is that we don't overdrive the heater in this tube. So two of these connections will be for driving the heater. If you've never seen inside a CRT, then this is what's inside one. At least this is what's inside a black and white one. Colour ones kind of have three of these. There's not a great deal in here. All we have is, on the right, this is the connector. You can see this is the one that's been broken off our ADM. We've got the connector. Two of the pins go through to a heater. You may be able to see it in there. It's the thing with the little white terminals, and it's just a small thermal heater to heat up the cathode. The cathode is the metal tube that surrounds it, and that's just a piece of metal with a special coating that causes it to emit electrons very readily when it's heated up. The rest of the structure up to this end point is a series of electrodes that are used to accelerate the electrons as they're emitted, and they are kind of shot this way and they come out of a hole in the end of this. This is the gun as it's referred to. They come out of a hole and then they go through past these magnets where the beam is deflected, and it causes a raster or pattern to be displayed on the face of the CRT. So there's not a lot in here, it's just a series of small metal cylinders in effect. The bit on the end is called the getter, and this channel, when this is assembled, is full of a material that when heated it's used to remove any remaining contaminants from within the tube. So when the tube is manufactured, this is slipped in with the tube still effectively open. As much air as possible is sucked out. The tube is then sealed, but because there's still contaminants in there, they do what's called firing the getter, which is just to heat up this ring, and that causes it to effectively absorb and remove any remaining contaminants, and it means that the tube lasts a lot longer and gives a much better picture. So not a lot in here, but we need to know which of these connections is which so that we can get the tube to work correctly. So there's only 7 connections on this particular CRT, so we need to try and figure out what they are. So we'll bring in our trusty meter. Now I noticed that the 2 pins, there are also standard pin outs for CRTs, and I noticed the 2 pins I think are likely to be the heater. One is connected to ground, which is this particular pin. So what we should be able to do, I'm just going to pop this back on to the tube. Okay, and I think that one of these two, probably the black one, is connected to ground, which it is. And I think that the other connection to the heater should be this one. And it is. So okay, we know which two pins the heater is. Now there shouldn't be any particularly high voltages, or relatively speaking that is. They'd be up in the 100 volts or more on some of the pins, so don't stick your finger on the back of one of these. The dangerous connection is the one with the blue wire that you probably can't see. It's the EHT. That's about 12,000 volts, so we definitely don't want to be putting our test meter probe on that. It obviously was working before I took the TV apart, because we had an image, or at least a noise on the face of the CRT, and it won't do that without the EHT. In fact, it won't do that without all the other voltages. And also we can probably guess this control on the back is most likely focus. It goes from ground on one of the terminals, the other one goes to this first pin, and then the other end, that's the wiper, and the other end of the pot goes to the second pin along. So I suspect the second pin along is our first anode, and the first pin is likely to be focus. I think this is probably a focus control. So what we'll do is we'll measure a few of these voltages, and we'll put the scope on what I think the cathode should be, which is most likely going to be this connection. And the reason I think that is because this is the normal arrangement we would have, and it's the only pin. These two pins are connected to ground. These two pins we think are an anode and focus. We know these two are the heater, and the only one that leaves that isn't connected to ground is this one, which is likely to be the essentially the video input going to the cathode. So this is all powered off, by the way. So we've measured the heater. What I'm going to do now is power this up. Now I actually have the speaker disconnected. It makes a horrendous din, partly because I haven't reconnected the volume control. So if I try and power it up with the speaker on, it will be at full volume, and it'll just be annoying for no reason. So I've left that disconnected. All the other things we need to have connected are connected. I've bypassed the power supply, as I said, and we're feeding DC power directly into the board. There is no signal going in at the moment, RF signal. It's just open. I've removed the connector for that as well, and everything else on the tuner is connected where it needs to be, and it should be enough to give us something on the face of the CRT. You won't be able to see it, of course. What we're doing here is trying to measure the voltages. So we'll set the meter to volts. I'm going to power the TV up. I've got the bench supply set to 12 volts, and we're drawing about 1.6 amps, which is what we were drawing before. I'm just waiting, and the tube has lit up. You said you can't see it, but there is an image on the face of the tube. And what we'll do now is start measuring the voltages. We think that one side of the heater is connected to ground, so that's this pin, and indeed that is ground. The other one will give us the heater voltage. That's important. We need to make sure that's the same on the ADM. So that's 10.6 volts. We'll look at what we think is the cathode, and that's going to be a relatively low voltage. So it's showing 18 volts. It's varying. There should be a audio signal on there along with the bias voltage. This one, I believe, is going to be pretty much ground, so that's our signal ground. So that's really the current path, if you like, for all the currents flowing into the CRT gun. We should then have a fairly high voltage, or relatively high voltage, on this. I can't really see with the camera in the way, but I think that's on, and that's 124 volts. It's quite low, so we should be able to manage that fairly easily in the ADM. And the voltage on the focus pin is obviously going to be somewhere between 0 and 124 volts, because that's what this pot's connected across, so 53 volts. Okay, so now we know what all the connections are to the tube. We can confirm this. What I'll do now is I'll tilt the tube up and move the camera so you can see the face of it, and we'll feed a known signal source into the RF input of the TV to give us a proper video signal, and hopefully we'll get something on the face of the CRT if we can tune the TV in. Still don't know if this tuner works, by the way, so this might not work, but judging by what happened when I touched the input to the antenna input, I think it's working. I just don't know if it will tune properly. I will also attach a scope to what I believe is the video in, and we should then be able to see on the scope the video signal, and that will then give us all the information we need to try and connect this tube to the ADM3 CRT control board. So the setup I now have is I've actually got a ZX81 here connected up to the input of the tuner, and I've propped up the CRT so we should be able to see the face of it, and this is now all set up. I haven't tuned this in, so hopefully it's going to work well enough to see the signal from the ZX81, and I've got the scope yellow channel connected to the audio input. So I'll move the camera so you can see the face of the CRT. I'll power this up, we'll try and tune it in and see what we get. Okay, well hopefully you can see the screen of the CRT. I'm going to power up the TV. It's getting noise at the moment, but you can see we did get what appeared to be some proper signal on the scope. It's noise at the moment because there's obviously no RF signal going in, and what I'll do now is turn on the ZX81. You'll notice there's some flickering on the face of the CRT. That's not evident in real life as ever, that's just an artifact of the camera shutter. Okay, I'll power on the ZX81. Don't expect anything yet, it's not tuned in. It's drawing power. What I'll try doing now is I'm just playing with the tuner here, trying to tune in the TV to the ZX81, and we'll see if we get anything appearing on the screen. So nothing so far. Something there. And we do indeed have the ZX81, so I'll try pressing some keys and make sure it's not just a blank screen. And it isn't, so that's looking fine. Also, if we look on the scope, notice that we have what appears to be a good video signal. So that's looking good. There's a few more keys on the ZX81. Okay, so we were right in our assumptions as to what the pins were on the base of the CRT. We now have all the information that we need. We know which are the anode pins. We know what the rough voltages are that are on there at the moment, and as long as we get something fairly similar, they're usually not that critical, but we do need to have them in sensible ranges relative to each other, or we won't get proper biasing of the tube. And what we should be able to do then is hook this up to the control board for the ADM. As I said, the biggest issue will be whether we can get a proper linear scan out of the CRT control board on the ADM. It might not be capable of driving this deflection assembly, and if I try putting the other deflection assembly on, it almost certainly won't work. They are very specifically designed for a particular type of tube. But we'll give it a go, we'll see what we get, and I'll do that in the next video. We'll get it hooked up, see if we can get it to do anything at all, whether it will light up, and then we'll have a bit of a play with it and see if we can get any sensible scanning on the face of the CRT. If not, at least now I have something I can use with the ZX81.